The French light tank that's being provided is 105 millimeter, still very effective against the old era Russian armored tanks. AMX-10 is a wheeled vehicle, but they also have machine guns. The machine guns themselves are also extremely effective. And they have a really potent psychological impact on the battlefield.
Mm.
On the battlefield, to some degree, there's not stalemate, but it's a period where neither side is making great gains. But what we continue to see is the Ukrainians have the initiative. The big plays come from the Ukrainians. We saw that only a couple of days ago with their very effective attack into Makivka, where they killed a disputed number of Russian soldiers, but certainly a very significant number. So all the plays continue to come from Ukraine, and we'll see what comes over the coming months.
And this call then for an announcement of a ceasefire by Vladimir Putin to take account of the Orthodox Christmas. I mean, how do you think that will play out? Do you assume that Ukraine will observe that period of ceasefire? Will they not? Will they feel a moral obligation to do so? What's your thinking?
Well, I think time will tell. I mean, a number of international leaders have already commented. To my knowledge, President Zelensky has not yet. Of course, the ceasefire needs both parties to sign up to it. This is a unilateral declaration of a ceasefire by President Putin, as you say, off the back of a call from the Russian Orthodox Church. It feels, I think, reasonable to say it's a cynical call for a ceasefire. There was no ceasefire over the kind of traditional Christmas period, as opposed to the Russian Orthodox Christmas. There was no ceasefire over New Year. So this feels like an opportunity for President Putin to try and shift the narrative. He's under greater and greater pressure at home from the military bloggers who expose his own errors. There's considerable anger about the Makivka attack. So this feels like a fairly cynical declaration. Indeed, I rather like President Biden, who's already commented, saying it was President Putin trying to seek breathing room.
It's been notable, hasn't it? The degree of criticism that Putin's now been getting from some of those commentators, those hawkish commentators. They don't go for Putin directly in their commentary, as far as you can see, do they? But they go for those around him, for senior officers, for officials. But the message is clear. They're unhappy, and they're much bolder about making that clear than they were.
Yeah, undoubtedly. And when the Russians have tried to blame the attack, in which the Russians admit at least 89 of their soldiers were killed, the Ukrainians claim 400. Either way, it was a very significant number. And the Russian high command are trying to blame the attack on poor mobile phone discipline by the conscript soldiers. Well, I mean, that is just displacing the blame. Any military that places ammunition in close proximity to a large barrack facility, which appears to have been the case in this instance, that is gross incompetence, gross negligence.
Mm.
And of course, what they're trying to do is shift the narrative, shift the blame away from Russian high command, away from President Putin, onto the kind of feckless conscripts who can't answer, because sadly for them they're dead.
No, it is every day a huge active question, isn't it? How far Ukraine's calls for weapons and ammunition from their friends in the West, in Europe, and in the United States and elsewhere are heeded. We're now hearing, aren't we, that France is about to send tanks to Ukraine. That's significant, isn't it? Will that put pressure on Germany to follow suit? Because it's Olaf Scholz, the leader of Germany, has been seen by many as being rather, I don't know, timid or reluctant to follow in that way.
Well, it's certainly significant, isn't it? Because it's coming from President Macron, who has sought to position himself as the interlocutor with President Putin. He has provided less fulsome support, shall we say, to President Zelensky than the Americans, than the British, than some other nations. And so it's significant from that point of view that he's providing these light tanks, AMX-10 RCs. They're old tanks, but they're pretty potent. So they are in themselves significant. Will it place pressure on on Germany? Well, it certainly appears to be. It's playing out in the media. There are already some statements coming out from senior members within the German government that would suggest that they're thinking seriously about this, talking about needing to stay in step with allies and providing the assistance that is required. It all feels as though it's the sort of narrative shaping towards a German announcement, but we'll see.
Could you give us, Rupert, a soldier's perspective on the value of tanks in this war? Because I can recall, it seems like forever ago now, watching the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson taking on Tobias Ellwood at the Defence Committee at Westminster, and then Prime Minister Johnson was pretty dismissive of the value of tank warfare. He was describing it pretty much as a relic of World War II. We think differently about that now, very differently. Just tell us about that.
Yes, I mean, I think those of us in the military have lost count of the amount of times that people have written off a tank. And with the very greatest respect to Boris Johnson as a politician, his understanding of tank warfare is relatively limited, shall we say. And as people have over time written off the tank, it's never borne out by evidence. Look, the reality is tanks are fearsome. If you've ever been in close proximity to a tank, they're 70 tons. They're beasts of the battlefield. There is a reason why President Zelensky is so keen himself to get hold of Western tanks, particularly German Leopards. They have a real value on the battlefield. Now, the Russians have fought them very, very badly, and they have been destroyed in significant numbers as a result. But when fought well, they are still valuable on today's battlefield. And by well, I mean you can't fight a tank in isolation. Tanks work well when they are in what we call an all-arms setting. So they've got to work with infantry, with engineers, with air cover, with intelligence. When they're fought as part of a package, they are a force to be reckoned with.
Yes.
And anyone who's suggesting they're relevant on the battlefield, well, I'd suggest they're being a bit premature.
I was reading that the lightweight German tank, the Leopard, was it not? That's a useful anti-aircraft weapon, or at least a good weapon, a defensive weapon against drones. Their rapid-fire armaments can bring down drones very easily and very effectively.
Well, I haven't seen that, but I think that's entirely possible. And of course, tanks they've got their big main armament, 120 millimeter often. The French light tank that's being provided is 105 millimeter, still very effective against the old era Russian armored tanks. AMX-10 is a wheeled vehicle, but they also have machine guns. The machine guns themselves are also extremely effective. And they have a really potent psychological impact on the battlefield.
I was watching just earlier on and reading about a social media video put up by the Ukrainians. It's a masked Ukrainian soldier, and the soldier was urging Russian troops to send coordinates of their ammunition dumps and heavy vehicles to spare themselves from having their quarters struck by missiles. I was just wondering, I mean, how valuable is that kind of warfare now, especially in this social media age?
Yeah, I mean, as a form of propaganda, it has some effect. The mere fact that we're talking about it, that people watch it, it has some effect. It is undoubtedly good for morale. Does it have any effect on a Russian conscript? Well, who knows? Possibly. A Russin soldier who's feeling he's far from home, he doesn't really want to be where he is. These things, they all get under the skin a little bit. I think the other thing is they mock the Russians, and President Putin does not like being laughed at. And these sort of posts, they also feed the bloggers back home who are, as you said earlier, they are increasingly vocal about the state of the war. So as part of a wider information campaign, which the Ukrainians have done exceptionally well over the months, then these posts have some value.